If you are looking to move forward in your life towards your authentic dreams without sacrificing your emotional health, your nervous system, your relationships, or your spiritual health, well, you are in good company. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Courtney Lancaster, and this is a safe space for creatives. This is the Heal Create podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Heal Create podcast. I am thrilled to have the guest that I have on for you today. Bobby and Brandi Fano are my guests today, and they have been our marriage coaches in the last few years. We worked with them for about a year. I'm so excited to dig into everything that they have to say, and I want to just before I give them the microphone, I just want to say what I had told them before this started, which was I work with so many creatives who are so brilliant and beautiful and also so swirly and relationally unstable. And so I knew that I wanted to have them on for the benefit of anybody who's listening, for my audience who's listening, who finds themselves in all of the cultural myths that we have around relationships and all of the disconnection that we experience and the confusion around what healthy partnership actually is. And there is no better couple that I can think of to speak to that than Brandi and Bobby Fano. So welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
So excited to be here.
I want to jump in. I actually heard you guys on a podcast recently where you had talked about how the idea that we need to be like healed or do our own work before we get into partnership is kind of it's not the way that you guys have done things. It's not the way that you've approached marriage, and it's not the way that you coach people to approach marriage too. So can you guys tell me a little bit about like, how did you get to that point? Because you are in the same culture I am, and all you ever hear, especially lately, is how if it's not working out, like, are you settling? Are you with the wrong person? If you have any doubts, like that's not the right person. Or if you have any trouble, you're not, maybe you need to go, maybe you need to move on to the consciously uncouple and go to the next relationship. And I'm wondering, like, with your history and how you guys got to this point, what was the, some of the highlights of the journey to get to that understanding?
You go first. You want me to dive in?
Sure. I mean, we had polarity right off the bat.
Yeah.
Right? That was like the big thing that drew us together. And then we were just so into each other. We're like, let's get married.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then, you go on that journey together. And then we got married.
Young.
We were super young. And then
how young were you guys?
23,
22, 23?
22 and 23 when we got married.
Okay.
So 21 and 22 when we met.
Okay.
Yeah. And you start living
got
together.
Got married a year later.
And you realize, what the heck did I get myself into? Right. And then all these things inside of you and amongst the relationship start getting unpacked.
Mm-hmm. Right.
To the point where
childhood stuff, teenage stuff, just all of the unconscious
identity.
Junk. Yeah. That we hadn't, grown up enough to even be aware of or how to, the thing is for me is like marriage is this great mirror, and marriage is the space where we get this opportunity to see ourselves, both in all of our glory and in all of the spaces where there's an invitation for growth. So, that happened fast for us, and we were young and we got pregnant, a year into marriage. So it was like, okay, we're married. And now all of our old stuff's coming up, and now we're parents, and we're starting a business, and we're moving across the country. So a lot came up fast.
Wow.
It was like a fast track into, our healing journey, I would say.
Yeah. So when you guys, I'm sure that you, just like every other couple, met the moments where you were like, what the heck? Whether it was like, I don't want to do this anymore, or like, maybe I made a terrible decision, or like, maybe this isn't right for me. Like, I'm sure that you had those moments.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Go ahead.
Our trigger is like I think that this divine, design is that we would trigger each other. And so like, he would trigger all of the spaces in me that were like abandonment issues, right? Or just these places that I had pain. And some of it was just really subconscious, unconscious at the time. And, so he was triggering the snot out of me, and then I would react and trigger him, in all of his spaces and places. And that's after, fast forward to today, after working with couples for, over a decade, it's like, oh, that's the idea that we would trigger each other, right? That's what we're all doing. And
it's not hard because you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Right. And it's not that you're with the wrong person. It's that, this is the gift, really, of being in a sacred, container of like marriage, because you're with this person more than anyone else. You know this person. They know you more than anyone else, right? And so, and they love you unconditionally, right? And so it's the design, right? The
divine design.
Yeah, is that, we believe God puts us together in order to, not only love each other and experience all the bliss and all the gifts and the fun, of our connection and our intimacy, and to do the hard work of healing those spaces, right? Seeing the things that are unconscious, that are in, that's in the dark, that, inevitably when you live with someone, when you have children, when you have teenagers and all these different seasons of life, toddlers, babies, teenagers, that these things are going to come to the surface. And what better space than this safe container, right, of relationship to transform and to grow and to heal.
Yeah. And it's more about the growth and becoming better than the trigger, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times we make it about the trigger, right? And the trigger is unique to the individual. But what we've learned is it's always about learning and growing in those triggers and becoming better.
It's what we do with it. It's the invitation of, okay, here's this thing, right? That's coming to the surface. Now what we do with it is going to make or break our experience of our relationship or our day or our intimacy or our connection or our own personal development. So it became, it became really clear to us early on, like we have work to do and we're going to have to do this together. Like we get to do this together, right? Like we're unique in that we're young. Not every couple goes into it that young, right? And that quick. But, we see also in couples who are, much older than us or, have gotten married later in life with a lot more consciousness or understanding or awareness around this stuff. And they too will have their own dynamics. It's really not unique. It's really every couple gets this opportunity to work through their stuff. It's just how you choose to look at that. Like you said, do we see it as an invitation to split up, or do we see it as an invitation to like become a better version of ourselves and evolve?
Yeah. How do you in hindsight, like, how did you move through those moments that were so hard, where you were like, this sucks, or like, this is like, I don't even know if I want to do this? Like, what was the thing that was like, but what if we kept going? Like, what do you think that was? Were you inspired by other couples? Do you think it was God? Like, that's a I would say fairly countercultural like thing, especially maybe at the time, maybe 20 years ago, to use that language, or to just kind of push through those hard moments, knowing that it's for your healing and growth. So what do you make of that?
I think there's layers. I think, there's that long-term vision. There's polarity that plays a role into that. There's learning maybe from an experience before, right? Yeah. And understanding those patterns and wanting to become better, right? It's that shift in perspective, like Brandi was saying.
I think curiosity, like to add on to what you're saying, like I trust Bobby. I've always trusted him. So, even when that was challenged, like he's proven to be trustworthy. So like his perspective, I want his feedback. And so when he was telling me the hard things about myself that weren't easy to hear, I was actually grateful at some level, like resistant at first as I was young and immature, but then at some level it's like, no one else has ever told me this. And I know there's truth in here. Right. And so it's like, I think the answer to your question for me would be like our love, our commitment. Yes, the covenant we made before God, but also like the commitment in my heart to like, I want to grow old with him. He's my person. I want him to be my person. I want to make that work. Yeah. So, and for me personally, it was like, I want to learn to love. Like we both, have parents that stayed married, but didn't necessarily like we didn't see them necessarily stay married and stay happy and passionate and have a polarizing, sexy dynamic.
Right.
Or like we stayed because, the family, or we stayed because we said I do, and they love each other. But for us, it was more like we want to learn to love and to stay because we want to, and because we choose to, and because it becomes this like desire. And so I don't know. I think for us, both of us, it was like we saw the truth, and maybe God played, I think God played a huge part in this, but like I would be praying for our marriage and I would hear like the voice of God, or, the spirit inside me say like, look at this that you're doing. Yeah. Right. Or like,
you're like, come on.
Why don't you try talking to him the way you talk to me, or honoring him, or worshiping him the same way you bring that reverence and that worship to me? Like, what good is it to go out and do it in church, or do it over here and not do it in the privacy of your own bedroom or home? So like when I would pray, like, God, change Bobby, it would be like this personal conviction I would get. And then I would hear, weaves of that reflection and feedback coming from him, and vice versa. So I think maybe what was unique for us in that season of life is like that we were walking with God. And so we were praying and we were listening, but also we were like really committed to becoming the best version of ourselves, and knowing that like, okay, even though I'm so angry with him right now, or I'm so triggered by him, or I'm not sure if this is going to work, there was something inside of us both that had the faith to like stay the course and trust, the other person, even when it was like really hard to receive, to trust the feedback. And so many relationship experts say like, don't give your partner feedback and don't be their coach and this and that. But like, who's going to give you better, more authentic truth in love? Like, I love you. I want you to be the best version of yourself. And you can't see that you're doing this, and vice versa. Like, you have this unconscious pattern, you have this trigger, like, or do you see, whatever it is. And like to be able to trust that, right? It's like a gift.
Right. Totally.
To be able to receive that and to be able to offer it too in love. Like nobody wants to see you, right, succeed more than me. And right, this is an area where you're stuck, right? And like let's go after this together. Like, I'm going to support you in this. So it's just a shift in perspective, I think. And it wasn't that we got there right away. It was just over time. I think we recognize like, we're going to have
the
to
value.
go in.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it took me forever, maybe because it wasn't like a part of the language I grew up with, or I wasn't getting like the right education for a long time. It took me a long time to recognize I was projecting so hardcore onto my partner. So a lot of people, I don't think, or everybody, like you just said, the divine design of it all is I did not meet my childhood pain and identity issues and like all of that programming until I was until I was married. But then I didn't see it because I didn't know how to see it for 10, 15 years after that. And that is something that it's like, and you guys must feel the same way when you're working with a couple or you're working with people, you can't unsee it. You're like, it's easy. Well, of course, to look at somebody else and be like, you're totally projecting onto your partner. It's like no judgment. It's just like, actually, it's good news. It's like, hey, guess what? He's actually not an evil person trying to hurt and ignore you and neglect you. Like, you actually believe that that's true about you, and you brought that in, and it's being mirrored back to you to be healed. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, 100%.
So for you guys, do you, if you can share a little bit, or if you want to share a little bit about like what were each of your guys' biggest projections onto each other that were being invited, the wounds that were being invited to heal, as much or as little as you want to share?
I think, just off the top of my head, a lot of my issues probably came from my relationship with my parents, right? Or like when I was younger and experiences. So, I'd be like, wow, some of the things that I struggled with my own home growing up is what, is happening in my own relationship. And that can be scary, right?
Yeah.
So, getting angry with like, how she was responding to me and, things like that. So I'd say that was probably my biggest struggle.
You were defensive, like, he felt like I was coming against him instead of on his team.
Yeah.
I remember like the moment of breakthrough for him when he recognized like, whoa, she's on my team, you know, like
Right.
all of this is for me. Right.
Yeah.
And
So like my parents, I felt like controlled me in some way.
Yeah.
She's trying to control me too, right?
Yeah.
So
there was, and then there was the reality of the control that I was bringing in the beginning, and you know, not really ever wanting to be that way, but you know, that was generational, kind of what was modeled for me. And so, like the fear, now I understand that it was the fear that was underneath some of that behavior that I was bringing early on in marriage, but it was really unnecessary and uncalled for. But it was just the programming that was coming through because of my fear of like, I don't want to end up like this, and I don't want to be like this or him to be like this. And so I would act, you know, in ways out of that fear, projecting some of that control that was triggering his, like, I don't want to be controlled, you know, early on. And then, you know, and then his response to that was like, no, you're not going to control me. And so he wouldn't, you know, bend to my demands. And then that really triggered my like, oh my gosh, is he going to drop me? Is he going to abandon me? Is he going to be there, you know, when I need him? And so there was like deep abandonment stuff for me that from my story, from my teenage years, and even from my childhood and being a baby. So like there were always these moments that seemed like, I know his intention wasn't to like hurt me or to leave me, but he was 5 minutes late, or he just left me on the top of this mountain and snowboarded way down, way faster, or, you know, he just did this thing and here I am alone. And I would like feel this reaction in my body and nervous system be like, he left me. Yeah. And yet my body was like, no, he didn't. He's just faster than you, or he's just this late.
Yeah.
You know, or whatever. And yet my body I would get like really worked up.
So
and so
crazy,
I know something is wrong. This is me. This is about me.
Right.
It's more about me than it is him. And so I started to communicate and really started to like look for help and look for books and look for research on this, because we didn't have any language for any of this when we were, you know, young, married in the church. They weren't talking about any of, you know, these things. And so I was like, you know, why is my body having this experience when my mind is like, he loves you. He wants to be there. He's going to be there, you know, and you can trust him. And yet my body was still freaking out.
Yes.
And vice versa. Sometimes he would like, you know, get really triggered by something I would say. And I'd be like, wait, I was just, you know, like wanting to see what our plans were going to be for later, or what we were going to do for dinner. Like, what's the deal? And so I think we began to notice that, you know, oftentimes the fight was never really about what we were fighting about. And the experience a lot deeper than what was coming up and what was like arising on the surface level. And so it made us curious. And I think curiosity is a huge piece of this, right? It's like, you know, what's really happening and what's this all about? And it made us really curious, you know, about our own stuff, but also about how to learn to love each other and to love each other in a way that would heal these specific dynamics so that we could just enjoy each other and build a life. So we became pretty passionate about like, let's end this never ending like pattern and these never ending dysfunctional cycles where, you know, we're triggered out and we're being reactive and we're in a fight and we're disconnected and neither one of us want this. It's not the truth of the heart, but it's a pattern that's playing out and it looks really similar to what we grew up in. And so we knew there was something generational happening, that energetically happening that we wanted to end for our kids. So we wanted to end for our future. So we got really curious around like, okay, what does healing really look like beyond prayer and ministry and, you know, the things that we had known, because it wasn't really effective. And so we were like, what does it look like in order for us to just take ownership over, this is my behavior. Like you said, this is my projection onto you. I'm something and now I'm blaming you for what I'm feeling.
That's right.
And so I'm going to point my experience to you. You must be the culprit for this experience I'm having. I'm stressed out and it's because you didn't do this thing. And so we became aware. And a lot of this was, you know, learning and understanding energy and learning and understanding what it looks like to take ownership over our experience and to co-create our lives versus living in reaction or being a victim or, you know, the devil's doing it or whatever. Right. And so it's like, you know, it was like going to school, like growing up 101 and just starting to understand that, you know, this life is reflecting back to us who I am. We see things as we are, not as they are, right? Really things as we are. And so we began to understand that, okay, this is not the experience we're wanting to create. Therefore, we have to create our own internal state.
Right.
Yes.
It's all about learning lessons. And we've also realized that, like, hey, we're going to keep going around the same mountain until we learn this lesson.
Right.
Right.
Yes. Definition of insanity.
Yeah. So,
right.
And then you learn a lesson, and then, right. And then you use that as a stepping stone, and then something else, right, arises where, okay, there's tension here and there's an issue. Right. And then you decide, hey, I'm going to trust this person. I'm going to shift my perspective. Okay. So that I can learn and grow, and we can learn and grow together. So what's really happening here, and you kind of deep dive and kind of remove those layers, right? And then you go to the next stepping stone, right? So just like what you were saying earlier, how like, oh, it took me some time, to realize these things. I mean, that is proof that you have grown and learned and become better because your perspective has changed.
And you're aware. I own that and see that.
And there's no shame in the game, because we're all on a different time period, right? We all have a different journey in our life. So, I think that I was super stoked to hear that, because, man, that shift in perspective is almost everything, right?
It is.
And I think the turning point for me was, I remember this day like it was yesterday. I was in the kitchen, and historically it was like, okay, Brandy's trying to control me, right? That was the thought process. And therefore she's trying to control me. She's like the enemy, quote unquote.
Right.
So she's like the bad guy in this moment. So I need to like resist that. And then I remember looking into her eyes as she was like, hey, I'm trying to help you. Right. And even though I was thinking it was critical a second before this moment, I was like, she's really trying to help me. And I looked in her eye, looked at her face, and I felt her heart in that moment.
Yeah.
She's my friend. You know what I mean? And that everything.
That's right. Yeah.
It was like, whoa, she's giving me feedback to help me.
Just like
So
opened it up.
Criticism to help. Okay.
Right.
Which for some people, that's a massive gap to bridge.
Sure.
Right. But we had a lot of history to where that massive gap had become smaller.
Yeah. And you could jump it.
Past experiences in all those years. Right. Totally. To where I was in that moment, like, boom, she's my friend. Wow. Okay, I'm going to listen to you now. Okay, I'm going to receive what you're telling me. And I mean, that was a game changer. That happened many years ago. So now, even if we have a little like tiff or a little disagreement, and you kind of feel that escalating a little bit, I'm like, all right, she's for me.
Yeah.
She's trying to help. So then I can kind of sit back and take some deep breaths and say, okay, where am I getting this wrong? What information do I not have in this moment?
Yes.
Right.
Growth, like a growth mindset.
Yeah. How can, what am I missing here?
Right.
I think that's, even when it comes to friendship, that is like one of the most powerful postures you can have is like, hey, what am I not seeing in this moment? Can you help me?
Right.
And I think that's, Randy's talking about curiosity, right? Versus, the other perspective is like, I got this, I know, right? Where you can't really learn if you think you know everything.
Right.
And then defense is just a wall, right? So anytime we're in that defensive posture, there's a lack of love we're going to be receiving. There's a lack of being in our heart. When we have a wall up, when we're being defensive energetically, we're blocking the love that we're giving and receiving. And so it's like, the ability for him to tear that down in that moment and to see past or to shift his perspective is kind of like me being like, wow, he's giving me this feedback. It's not easy to hear. It kind of stings, and he loves me, even though I'm doing like this or this right now. Or even though I have these patterns or these, these shadows, he still loves me. Yeah. And so, that's a unique relationship. How many people in your life are like, I smell your shit, so to speak, and I freaking love you, and all that comes with you, I want all of it. And so, shifting our perspective to receive from the person that knows all of us and wants all of us and loves all of us, even in our mess, even in our, all of our stuff. Like, to me, that shift in perspective was like, so now we kind of, we're asking, we have a practice now where it's like, bring it to me, like, how can I love you more? How can I love the kids more? How can I show up better at work? What am I not seeing? And so it's, it's a complete 180 from the beginning, where it's like we need to defend ourselves and fight and protect our hearts from this love, really, because love looks like something, but we want it to always feel really good and feel like roses and romance and sex, and the reality is love like includes all of the hard work, right, and all of the hard conversations and all of the I love the verse that's like, it's easy to love someone, right? It's one thing to love someone, it's easy to love, but real love is the hard parts of ourselves and those in our life that are less easy to love in this moment. That's real love. And so for me, my commitment not only to being his wife but also to learning to love was a commitment I made before God, that was like, I am here to love. I know I am. I believe God is love, right? And I believe God's inside of me, which means I know I am love. So I'm here to realize that. Like, my life's purpose is to realize and fully embody love. So how, my pattern with before Bobby was like, oh, this is getting hard, let me jump to the next guy. This is hard, let me go back to this guy.
Right.
And so like, but I wasn't learning to love by doing that.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
We see that modeled now in culture so often. It's like, yeah, well, it was great for 3 years and I'm moving on. But like, how do you learn to love? Because the first 3 years are really easy, right? The first, that initial period, like it doesn't take a real genuine love to get past. But this is where you really learn to love. This is what real love, we know this as parents, right? It's like we love them and we do all of these hard things for them and they challenge us and trigger us and stretch us and we unconditionally love them no matter what. But we have culture has defined marriage in a different way. That's like, you don't have to unconditionally love them. Yeah, you can just move on.
Yeah.
Right.
The gift that comes on the other side of that,
so
the loyalty, the intimacy, the trust, the depth of our connection and our passion only grows through each of those hard, knotty seasons and moments in ways that we never have known before that. And we know that's true now. From fast forward to all the couples we worked with, we're like, that's the gift of going through of growing and loving through those hard places, is you touch a depth of intimacy and you touch the divine. I mean, you experience God now on the other side of that in a way you can't ever when you're 3 years in. And it's, easy, right? Or you don't have kids, or you haven't been through any challenges, right? Or seasons.
Totally. Yeah.
It's puppy love is great. It's super fun, but it's not the real thing that happens after, decades of doing the work in order to really become love and to really experience God through loving your spouse. Like, that's the real gift.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think like one of the biggest, the brain and the nervous system, you guys can probably speak to this too, are so brilliant in the ways that they will come up with reasons why we should be distant. There should be walls here. The blame, the like very brilliant blame. One of the things that I like kept struggling with over the years, like probably the most brilliant story that I had that was keeping me from being very deeply, intimately connected to James, is something that I hear all the time and that I think culture reinforces all the time, which is, what if I've outgrown my partner? What if I've outgrown them? What if I am more focused and committed to my own growth and they're behind? Which I think that most couples have one person that's more like forward marching when it comes to like healing and emotional growth. But what that was doing for me was it was like it was keeping me from really seeing his essence. And like one of my favorite relationship anxiety coaches and teachers, Cheryl Paul, talks about how like the cut through question when you're wrestling with like, is this the person, or are we the right match, or what's going on, is like, is this a person with whom I can learn about love? And from that context, anytime I brought that question in, it was like, oh shit, I did it again. Like every time I would just start to feel like, you know what? Like, you don't understand the same things I understand. We're not passionate about the same things. Like, I'm really, whatever. I've like this idea that like you could grow at a faster pace. And I am like so impressed with my nervous system's ability to use that to keep me from actually being vulnerable enough to be loved by him. And so you guys were each other's perfect trauma puzzle pieces, just like we were each other's perfect puzzle pieces. And I think like it's almost mystical how perfectly that actually matches up most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, why do you think we're so drawn to that person, right?
Right.
It's for all of it. It's like, why come together? And then, you know, it's like we see this in our kids, and it's easy to point out other people, but it's like, oh, that's hard, I don't want to do it, or oh, it's not working, I have to quit, or right. And so when the reality is like, you know, you asked in the beginning, like, what do you think it was? Our soul knows, our spirit knows.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, even when I didn't want to stay the course or didn't think we would make it, right? You know, my higher self, God inside, Holy Spirit, whatever you want to call it, was like, yeah, right. We're staying, we're doing it.
Yeah.
Right? And you,
no way
want,
out.
Yeah. You want this. This is actually what you want.
Right.
I'm feeling it right now. This is what you want. And then like 3 days later, I'd be like, oh my God, you know, I'm so in love with him, and this is what I want.
Yeah.
Right. Another hard thing will come. And so we've kind of learned in the 2 decades together that like the hard moments are going to come, right? The sandpaper, the tension, right? It will arise, but we deal with it, like Bobby was saying, and we handle it, we respond to it so differently now. And our perception is so different about it now. Like the perspective, like what we were saying, is so different now that it's like, oh, okay, here we go. Here comes another like next level. Like here comes another, you know, I almost am. I don't want layer. Yeah, I don't want to go through a hard thing. I never do. I still don't. And yet I know on the other side of the hard thing,
it's so true.
Will be another layer of intimacy and depth and love and like oneness that we couldn't have known before.
Yeah.
Because of how we're into it, because of how we're, you know, going to receive it.
Yeah. So how do you guys, so many people are afraid of being truly seen in relationship, like at the core, that's such a deep fear. And I'm wondering, how do you guys create safety in your marriage to bring your like raw, unhealed parts without shame? And what would you say to somebody who's afraid that their vulnerability would push their partner away?
I mean, Bobby's been so good at affirming and loving the parts of me that are just messy and raw. And I mean, you know me, the way I am is like, I live my life. I'm very open. Like I'm very authentic. Here's my truth. Might come out wrong, and it might offend you or other people, but I just am very raw. And so like I bring him my storm, I bring him my emotions, I bring him my mess or my insecurity or whatever it might be in the moment. And he, especially over the, you know, the last 10 years, he's really learned to hold space and to encourage that and welcome that and invite more of that in a way that makes me know like he wants all of me. He loves all of me. Nothing is going to turn him off or turn him away. In fact, he's only going to like this vulnerability is only going to enhance our intimacy and our connection. Yes. And you've been really good at making me feel super safe in all my forms.
Absolutely. I like the spiciness. What can I say? That is a spice of life, right? Because I mean, if we were all proper and we had these amazing conversations that were always everything that we wanted to hear, it would be boring.
Right.
Okay. Right? It would be boring. So sometimes you got to ride the waves because we all have them. I had moments where I just like needed a cry on Brandy's shoulder, you know? And it was healing. I mean, it was what I needed. I mean, I had some stuff bound up for a long time, so I had to let it loose. That is part of the healing journey and being healthy, I believe. I mean, you can't be healthy if you're bottling everything up. You're going to feel it in your body eventually, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's a wonderful thing when you have that much trust in a relationship, and trust is a prerequisite, I think, to being seen, because I believe you should let it hang out inside the home anyways, and to be authentic. You know, obviously, if you've done that multiple times and that wasn't, you know, accepted or seen, that's a different story, right? There's a lack of trust there,
or
safety, right? So it's really important that you have that trust there. We talked about depth, right? When you go through hard things, that's what creates depth.
Yeah.
Okay, that's trust too.
It builds that
right?
bridge.
If you think about your best friends, you've gone through hard things with them, right?
Yeah.
And then we talked about calling each other out. That is love.
Yeah. Right.
We tell our kids, like, hey, if there's something like another friend there that just tells you everything you want to hear, and there's another friend,
It gives
right,
you
that like
honest feedback.
tells you all the crap that you're doing. Trust that friend.
Right.
That's calling you out. Right. So, I think those are huge when it comes to longevity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're, one of the things that we learned in that early season around like doing our own work is that like, we're human, and all of this is part of the human experience, not just the front we put on for the, public to see, and not just the happy and the joyful and the grateful. Like all of it is holy. All of it is human. All of this is holy and human, right? There is no separation between like, what's sacred and secular, whatever. So like this, like the anger, it's okay. Like I was so triggered by his anger in the beginning because I had seen that modeled in an unhealthy way. So when he would get angry, it would really,
sure.
And I would like want to shut it down. And I didn't give myself even permission to be angry for years. So like learning that like anger has its place and how to move through it. I mean, I'll never forget one time Bobby's like, get in the car. Like, where are we going? He's like, I'm taking you to a rage room. I'm like, what? And he's like, we're going to a rage room. Like, you're going to work this out. Like, you're going to move it through your body. And like, it was such a liberating and a healing thing. Like break a bunch of glass and throw things and do it in a safe space. Right. Because, it was just liberating this idea, deeply seated belief that like, it's not okay to be angry. There's no reason or I don't need to express this, or grief, right? Or sadness or disappointment. So really learning that like all emotions have a place, right? They all carry wisdom, and we honor and listen to the body and to the emotions, as somewhat of a compass. We're not completely moved by them, but like we give them space, right? And we honor them, and we let them through us without shutting it down. And that really builds a bridge. As you know, when we're working with clients, as we work together, it's like when you can be open and vulnerable with someone, you build a connection with that person, right? When you cry with me, when we're sharing deep, intimate things, right? It's like a bridge of trust is built, and a connection that will carry on for the rest of your life, because that vulnerability creates a bond, right? And in the same way, we don't want to go be vulnerable with the internet. We want to be vulnerable with the people in our life that we know are safe to do that we want to grow with. And so, so learning to be vulnerable and learning to bring all of it, learning to express all of it and hold space for one another's emotions was a huge piece of our journey personally and as a couple, right? And then with raising kids, just so that we could be free, fully free. Right? And not just our sex life, but in every area of our life, to be liberated and feel, to honor, to express, to be authentic in our truth, no matter what that was. And that, that's been super healing and liberating for us. And it's kept us from like, we don't get stuck anymore the way we used to get stuck. What I've seen now with clients, right, is like we get stuck when there's emotions that don't have a place, when there's something in our life that we're not allowed to express, or a part of ourselves that we're not expressing.
Totally.
And, that's how we get stuck or sick.
There's literally hundreds of emotions that a human can experience. And I think the average, person in our country or culture like experiences 8, and most of them suck. Right. So it's about the full spectrum. And I think what's been a game changer for us is intentionality. Okay. When's the best time, right, to leverage that emotion?
And how?
Right. So that's the game changer, is when you use intention with those emotions.
You can alchemize the experience, right? And we turn something that could have been a big mess or a big fight or a big break or disconnect it becomes an invitation into like a really beautiful, healing, transformative experience.
And that's such a good point that I think a lot of us still struggle with, is like when letting the man be emotionally expressive. Like that was so foreign to me. Like it was like terrified me. And I almost trained James to not show emotion because my nervous system would react so dramatically. And then I think vice versa. Like a lot of men are like, well, whoa, there's a lot here, like with their wives, or, and I think like what you guys are saying, and it sounds like the key, or one of the major keys to your connection, is like knowing that we do live in human bodies with hundreds of emotions. all the time, especially if you have any imperfection in your history, which is everyone every single day, then you're going to have a lot of emotions, sometimes mismatched, sometimes bigger than needed. And it doesn't really matter because it's just it's just your humanness, which kind of brings me to, I would love, you talked about polarity twice. And I told you guys before this call, I actually just had a meal with a married couple, and they were like, wait, what does that mean? Polarization, polarity? And it's something, I wonder if you can do this. Can you describe polarity and its importance from scratch? Like as if somebody had never heard of it before.
Sure.
So polarity is an arc of energy, okay? And an arc of energy requires two opposite poles, okay? So kind of like a battery has a positive and a negative side, and that creates a charge, okay? So we use polarity in relationships to signify that arc of energy, which we would call attraction, right? So the farther the poles are away, the more energy there is, the more attraction. All right. So that's the term. All right. So there's that old adage that opposites attract. We say that for a reason because that creates a lot more polarity and energy, and you can actually leverage that, right? So if there's maybe, not a whole lot of, the example would be a greater gap would be someone who's really still, we would call that masculine, right? Where they're very focused. And then you have, another partner that's maybe not very focused, right? That's very creative, likes to move a lot. Okay. That's going to create a stronger attraction.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to describe it to clients who are like, this is new to them as like, okay, you think of the sun and the moon, right? The moon is always changing. The moon, it like represents the feminine in nature, and like her expression is always changing, right? There are the phases of the moon every month, right? And the sun is unchanging. The sun is consistent. The sun is the masculine energy. It's the penetrative energy, right, of creation. And it's unchanging. It's always there, right? It's always giving life. And it's still, right? It's consistent. We can depend on it, right? And its form doesn't change. And so the picture of sex can kind of give you the idea of like when we're working with masculine and feminine, it's like one energy is penetrative and one energy is receptive, right? And one energy is, like Bobby said, is moving. It's like life force. It's like nature. It's always growing, always changing, always, right, expressing. And one energy is like consciousness that's unchanging. And so you'll typically find in most relationships there will be we both are both. Like there's idea that like the woman, all feminine, the man,
of course, right? Yeah. Like when I'm doing my business stuff, I have to be like in my masculine energy, like got to get stuff done, got to figure it out. Not that I am masculine, but then I don't want to be there in my marriage relationship.
Right.
And
we call that right brain, left brain, right?
Same thing. Yeah.
So
sure. Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah. It's the same that, so it's everywhere. It's all throughout creation. And, Eastern cultures are really good at teaching this as a foundational principle to health. It's all through like Ayurvedic textbooks about like, the principles of being in health is being in harmony in our body, where our masculine and feminine energies are both working together to be supportive. And that's true in relationships. So, when there is that arc of energy, like Bobby described, there's, everything is happening. It's all there. And yet over on one extreme or one side is going to be a masculine pole and one side is going to be a feminine pole. And this is true in same-sex relationships too. There'll be one that plays more of a masculine role and one that plays more of a feminine role if there is attraction. And what happens when we see, in that like chemistry, when you still see that dance of chemistry and attraction, and flirting happening and desire, right? You'll see that there's an arc of energy and there's two polarizing opposite energies. And what happens, often in relationship after that 2-3 years or that initial period wears off, if we have a family, if we're both working, or if you're raising kids, right, is that, we see people move into resonance. And so the opposite of polarity is resonance, where you're both in the same, like let's say you're both working and you're working side by side. You'd both be like described. You'd both be in that masculine energy or that get it done work mode, right? I like to call this like in my head, like I'm just like, I'm doing the things, right? I'm task oriented. I'm penetrating life, right? I'm getting stuff done.
Yeah.
And so when you're both in that space, you're in resonance, right? Or if you're both parenting and you're nurturing your kids together, you're both in the feminine, right? You're flowing together, you're being creative together. So you're in resonance, right? And so there's not going to be that like desire to rip each other's clothes off when you're in the same pole.
Right. You're both crying at your kid's graduation. You're both watching yeah, totally. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
So that's the opposite. So like to describe it in a summary, it's like, polarity is like that, that the arc of attraction between two opposing forces, like sun and the moon, night and day, cold and hot, right? It's
the North and South Pole.
Right.
So here's how it kind of plays. This is how you can leverage it. I talked about leverage, right? So we can choose, right? Kind of where we're at with right brain, left brain, right? If we're doing something creative or being more focused, right? So even with the energy within a relationship, right? It's kind of like this. I like come home and my wife is mad. Brandy's mad, right? And she is just giving me all her emotions, right? She's running all around the house, saying whatever she wants, right? And if I come in there and I'm all emotional too, where I'm like, you always do that, right? And I start moving my hands everywhere, there's no polarity. Okay. Resonance. That's like, we're probably going to get away from each other. We're going to go the other way. We're not going to be attracted to be opposing, right?
Spice gonna happen.
Okay.
Right.
So let's just say I open the door.
Fight.
Here's take two is I open the door and she's doing the same thing. And I come in and I move real slow, right? And I breathe deeply.
Yeah.
I put maybe my briefcase down and I come in front. I'm really still.
Did this just happen or something?
and I'm watching her now. Right? So she's running all around the kitchen and I'm just watching.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm listening.
Yeah.
I'm not saying anything, I'm listening. Right. So that is very attractive.
And you come and you grab me and you pull me in for a hug or a kiss.
Yeah.
Right. He's polarizing the moment. He's making up a scene that I'm sure has happened, but he's describing what it was like to polarize the moment, right? Or vice versa. If he's in, focused mode, right? And I come in and I sit down with the computer and I'm focused next to him and we're both focused on paying the bills or doing whatever we're doing, there's not going to be a lot of arc of sexual interaction, right? And yet if I come in and I'm moving my body and I lay on top of him and I'm rolling around like a kitty cat and purring, he's polarized to my movement and captivated by the feminine essence, which is inviting him into a different space, right? Or
we see this in movies all the time, right?
For sure. Yeah. And we see it so much less in like actual everyday relationships where especially once you have kids, most of the relationships that I know that are struggling have kind of come into this very neutral, like sibling dynamic or like roommate. Yes. Right. And it's like and for us, it was essential to understand. I kept noticing I felt more feminine, which is a value of mine. Like one of my core values is my femininity and embodying femininity. And I would notice that it was easier for me to like feel that way outside of my home, which should have been a huge indication of the work that I had to do. And I just was blaming it on James, whatever, not being man enough. And now it's like so obvious to me looking back, of course. But now when I see it in other couples, not everybody wants to know that they're not polarized. Not everybody is excited about this as I am, but it's like, oh man, if only, or maybe you can speak to this, like how do you help a couple reawaken that polarity for the couples that do feel more like roommates? That masculine and that feminine is such a magical place to be when both feel secure in those energies, those identities. How do you help people like reawaken that from the beginning?
I mean, I think probably the most common example and beginning step would probably be like just communication, right? Because if we're as the woman, as the feminine, if we're communicating to our man in a penetrative or a controlling or a domineering or emasculating, critical, so what's so common, right? We see this nagging, right? It's not polarizing them. They're not like desiring to ravish our hearts and romance us and sweep us off our feet and go take us to the bedroom when we're speaking to them that way. They're like, how can I learn from you, right? How can I? And so there's like, I think that the first step is like recognizing the communication, what you're omitting through your words, how you're communicating. 90% of communication is body language. That's why we were describing like the physical way that this would look in a home, right? But even in our words and how we're talking and how we're expressing, and the way that we say something, you can say it one way and it can be received and shut down, right, or disregarded, and then you can say it way where it feels like an invitation and you're playful and you're receptive and you're inviting him in to help you. It's like, I can demand that you do something for me, or I can invite you to help me by telling you how much I could use your strength or your help, or I would love you to just show me how to do this. Or, it's like, love, could you come, dig this hole for me? Or like, I asked you to dig the hole for me, it's like whatever it might be. And so there's a way that we can communicate that polarizes our men to want to step in and be more and do more. And there's a way we can shut them down and emasculate them, which makes them not really want to rise to the occasion and be our
sure.
And so I always start there. It's like, first become aware of the energy that you're omitting moment to moment, in the way that you speak to him.
It takes practice.
Totally. Yeah, this is for sure, because it's entrained in the nervous system, just like all the other.
So powerful.
The trauma, right? It lives in there
totally.
as a mechanism, as a self-protective mechanism. It's the ego, which really is that wall, like we said. It's really that protective shell that keeps us from the intimacy and the vulnerability, like you were describing. So it's that story that's playing out. The belief creates the behavior, right? The behavior creates the experience. And so, we start with identifying the beliefs and identifying the behaviors so that we can see, okay, so this is how you're showing up in your relationship most of the time. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you were out in the world having this experience where you're showing up one way, but then you'd come home and you'd show up another way. Why? Because that's a pattern, right? That you were in your nervous system that you were playing out probably subconsciously until you recognized it.
Right.
All the practice, right? Different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think that's very common because when I started coaching with you guys, it like still makes me laugh. I was like, we want to, improve our marriage. I'm ready for a deeper intimacy and like kind of what's in the way. And we did coaching with you for a year, and then I unpacked it for 2 years after that. And I I had to be honest with myself that when I said I wanted this, and I think this is true for a lot of couples, maybe especially women, but I can only speak for my own feminine self. I said that I wanted to be closer to my husband, and I wanted deeper intimacy and like all of the romance and all the things. And you're giving us these tools, and I'm like, oh shit, like there's no reason for me now to say I don't know how to do this. So I have to be honest about the fact that there's a part of me that actually doesn't want this. And it wasn't my true adult self. It was for my young self that like did not feel safe to be seen in her family home growing up. And your partner is going to just mirror back to you how you felt in your primary attachment. And so I think that it was ultimately, I did try and quit twice. To try and quit this coaching twice because it was so hard. I was being confronted with so much of my own subconscious fear around really being seen in my primary partnership. But man, it was the work that changed our entire family. It was the work that changed our marriage and continues to change our marriage and our life. And so I think like polarization, do you have any just if somebody was obviously people can reach out to you and follow you guys, but any basic resources for this? Because I think it's so essential to understand for couples that want to learn and heal what's in the way of them getting closer, is this idea of polarity.
There's so many different teachers, and I can't say that I have a favorite go-to.
Yeah, it's sort of pieces of everybody's. Yeah.
But I think first getting honest about what the energy is between the two of between the partnership, between the marriage, like really that first work that I do with all of my clients first is like a journey of self-awareness. Like if we're not aware
self-awareness
of who we are and how we're showing up and owning, right, our experience, like you said, and if we're still in like it's him, right, we're not quite ready. But once we're like, no, I'm ready to do the work here and I'm ready to actually do my part, we start seeing things shift so fast. And so, I would say like that would be the key is like starting there. And often we need that outside support to help us see how are we. I have like clients I work on the phone with, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to record this and we're going to play it back. And then now you tell me what you hear. And they're like, whoa, right? Because they don't realize how they're coming off. And right. And so this is true for us. It's like, and you can ask your partner, for this kind of feedback too. But I think it's really important that we have the awareness of like, how am I being received? Because we might feel like we're showing up one way, but then, having someone in a safe space where whether it's a coach or a friend or a spouse to say like, well, you actually sound, or you're actually showing up this way, even though, right? So this is the truth. And then, so that's your honest starting point. So now you have something to work with. If you can own that, and then it's like, okay, what do I want? And then we work to bridge the gap between where I'm actually at and how I'm actually showing up and what I want to experience or create in my marriage. And so, and then you get to do this with your partner for fun as often as you want and as many times a day as you want, right? It's like where we can shift the energy and change the dynamic moment to moment now, because that becomes the new pattern in your subconscious, your nervous system. So anything you do over and over again on repeat, eventually you don't have to think about. And we're not having to think about that or do polarity practice anymore. But for a while it was training our nervous systems to like, okay, this is what it feels like for me to be in my feminine and bring him that energy. And this is what it feels like for him to really embody more of the masculine role. And we practiced that for a while, for a long time, until we don't have to practice anymore, like driving. We don't have to think about driving. And so I would just say that any couple, my encouragement would be like, any couple can learn this. It doesn't matter how broken or how disconnected you feel. If you understand the energetics, of any relationship, right? We use this with our kids. We polarize them in moments where we need their attention or we need them to be present and connected, right? It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. Energetics and dynamics in relationship. It helps you become better in business. It helps you become better in any relationship, right?
Right. Yeah. You said something, one of you said it in this last interview that I listened to of you, where you said it's tedious work. And I don't know why that felt so like, it actually felt like relief, even to me. I don't feel it. We're not in a crisis at all right now. And it was still just like, yeah, like it is tedious work and it is so worth it. But I don't think that we're prepared even at all for like the tedium of the work that the daily self-awareness and turning towards each other. And so it's, yeah. So I think like what you're saying is like committing to the work, burning the boats, so to speak. Yes, burning the ships and like knowing.
He always says that,
Really?
Yeah, because he's like, when you burn the ships, there is no going back. He's like, that's the mindset.
Yeah, and the foundation of commitment. Really quick, can I just ask you guys, just before we go, really quick, can you guys tell me, I feel like you guys are the youngest 40-somethings ever. Your 40s. Yes. And yeah, and your family life is so beautiful. And you were the first person to teach me about the value of a daily practice, which I still implement to this very day. And I'm just, I think that we have so much to learn from like couples that are, I mean, you're not old at all. We're like the same in the same decade, but you're aging in such a beautiful way and an inspiring way for all the 20-somethings and 30-somethings who feels like they have to get their life together before, I don't even know, before 40. So I'm wondering like, what is something currently right now in this season of your life? I know you have a daughter is she graduated or she's going to college?
Graduating next month.
Oh, okay. So that's a real thing for you. What's something that each of you guys in this season of your life are really excited about?
You want to go first? I mean, this is a really exciting season because we're launching her this summer to college. She's moving 3.5 hours away. So like it's like this bittersweet experience for my heart of like I'm so excited for her. She's so ready, and it's such a sweet, like we have such a great dynamic and relationship, and that's such a sweet feeling. It's like she has made great choices. We're so proud of her, who she is, and so we're really excited. Like we're genuinely excited. We just couldn't be celebrating and cheering her on, more. So that feels really good. And it's also a bittersweet feeling of like, oh my gosh, our whole life's going to change. It's going to be 4 of us here. Right. And see her maybe once a month or whatever it is. I don't know. So, but yeah, it's really exciting. That'd be my answer. How about you, Love?
What comes to mind is, the last year we've actually been increasing our health in so many ways, right? We're like, we feel like we're in the shape of our life.
Best shape, yeah.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure.
And, just with Lily launching and, we're going to have our 2 other kids are getting older. Like when you feel better and you have more capacity and you're healthier, your life just gets better.
Bigger.
So I definitely have specific goals, short-term and long-term. But there's also a curiosity. I think that you've touched on too, just like, us looking young and growing vibrantly, that I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Yeah.
Because I know it's going to be good, but I don't know how good.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So,
yes. Yeah.
So I see what's possible. And I think that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah. We're dreamers and visionaries. And yet we love like, our day-to-day has been so delicious. And so we love life. Like we're super content, but we also have, like this, like I love what you said, it's like, wow, like I wonder what is in store because we've built this really strong foundation and we have this great faith, right? And this, and also sex just keeps getting better all the time. So
did you hear
that's
that,
always,
everybody?
That's always about. That's always my favorite part of life. And I'm old enough now where they can hear me say that out loud. So it's great. But like if nothing ever changed, I feel really content and complete. Like I have like literally lived in my blissed out dreams.
Yeah.
And yet there's so much on the horizon. Like we're just getting started at the same time.
Yeah.
So really good space to be in.
I love that. Thank you guys so much. I hope that I think most of my audience and clients are like 20s and 30 something, and there's just such this like freak out about life, and I'm like trying to tell them no, like I feel like I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
It's like so your 20s and 30s are about so much work. Not that we'll not all have to do work forever, but it's so different, and so and I feel like you guys embody that so beautifully. So thank you guys so much for coming. Where can people find you?
BrandyFano.com. BobbyFano.com.
Yeah, we're on the gram. It's pretty easy to find us, but thanks so much for having us. You're amazing. It's been a gift and an honor to get to work with you guys and get to support you in your journey. Love seeing what you're doing now. So
thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming. Anyone listening can check them out, and I love you guys and have a great day. Bye.
See you. Bye, Courtney.